So this leads me to the rules that we put over these programs. So here, and I want to start with funding principles before I get to funding criteria. And what I want to share with you here is that this is typically the kind of information you will also put in your theory of practice or your strategic framework. I'm going to come back to the case studies I've just skipped. I just want to go through this. So typically, your funding principles must tell people before they apply, what are your funding cycles? Because there's nothing as bad is to raise that expectation. I've just told you 200 NGOs, on average 2 people per proposal worked on it, which means 800 people worked on a proposal. They thought, they can put in everything for their whole project over the next 3 years, but you only fund annually. So you've got to decide before the time, what are these funding principles? And these funding principles is typically time cycles. How long will you fund for? Do you do scaled funding? First year, 80% of total requests, and you're going to, because of your exit strategy, you reduce? Or is it equal amounts over the 3 years? Are those amounts dependent on specific deliverables, on specific outcomes and results? Those are the funding principles. So it's typically, what is the maximum amount that is available? Because then they know before they send the proposal, it doesn't help, we sent you a $30 million 3-year proposal if you only have 2.7 for 12 months. Okay? So the maximum amount that you prepare to invest, the maximum time, especially for multi-year grants, you must be very clear, do you only pay, now this is the big contentious issue, program or operational expenses, or both? And we're going to come to those development models in a minute. Whether you accept proposals unsolicited, so to your point of yesterday, Charlene, getting 500 a month, have you communicated, we only accept proposals January? Because that is why you keep on getting more, because you haven't given that framework. Only make funding decisions twice a year. We've got 2 funding cycles. Because and that is the point that I made yesterday with how bad is bad, because we're not communicating. We're setting ourselves up for this constant deluge. Firstly, because we haven't defined our portfolios, we haven't defined our theory of change, so anybody that's looking for anything can send us a proposal. And this is where the funding principles come into play. Decide on your funding cycles, decide your deadlines for applications. Are you only going to put out calls for proposals, or do you accept unsolicited proposals, or both? Whether you're going to focus on program outcomes or institutional building or operating expenses or none of the above. What is it that you're going to fund? Number of workshops? Or do you want to pay for the outcomes, the results? Are you going to fund only collectively or individual organizations? Whether you only fund in a specific region. This year, our focus is on the Eastern Cape. We're only looking for programs in that specific geographic location. You've got to be very clear. What is investment? What is donations? What is sponsorship? What is course-related? So that they know. If you're expecting the organization to be sustainable or the program to be sustainable, if you're expecting the organization to be sustainable, they must provide evidence of income. Multiple income streams. Are they charging the beneficiaries? Are they looking for co-funding? Are they dependent on lottery funding? Are they looking for overseas funding? I don't know what that is. But if your expectation is sustainability, then you've got to define what that means. So this is your funding guidelines. Now we come to funding criteria. So the guidelines, the principles is this broad. And it's related to our theory of practice and our theory of change. But now we come to the yes or the no decisions. Right. What will we fund and what won't we fund? And this is typically where stuff comes in. We don't fund individuals. We don't fund trips. We don't fund conferences. We don't fund fundraising. We don't fund church groups. We don't fund. That is the criteria. And it's very important that these are also documented, because when somebody turns around and says, why not? It's not because you didn't like them or because they forgot to send their NPO certificate. It's based on these principles applied uniformly and these criteria. So what I've got here, for instance, there's not considered and not made. Okay, so we don't even consider toys. We don't consider year-end parties. We do not even consider don't even approach us for that. And that is part of that reducing the 500 a month kind of, especially towards the end of the year. Okay? And then also, we don't do bursaries, we don't do scholarships, we don't do, and that is like, don't even approach us, matching funds or whatever. And I've just given you a long list of what I've seen.